Over the course of the past few years, we have seen vast environmental changes taking place in the form of weather, climate, and environmental disasters. For our society, this is the latest reminder that climate change and environmental degradation has reached a dangerous point, and we are facing a perilous future of further climate-related disasters. I have faith in our generation. We have proven that no matter our identities and our backgrounds, we care about addressing climate change. We aim to address climate change in the ways we choose to live our lives, whether that is by reducing our consumption, changing our dietary lifestyles, making ethical shopping choices, or donating to the organizations we believe in. Our drive to make change is powerful and amazing, but it is frequently misguided. One of the biggest barriers preventing successful mobilization against climate change is the hyper-individualization of responsibility. Popularized narratives around ecological degradation have weaponized our passion for change. Instead of challenging the inequitable systems, we have been redirected to hyperfixate on our individual contributions towards climate change. Financially and legally powerful corporations have intentionally shifted the responsibility for climate change onto individuals. As individuals, we are urged by these corporations to prove our dedication towards combating climate change and ecological degradation through the means of personal consumption and lifestyle choices. They ask us, are you the perfect consumer? Are you buying reusable products, ethical brands, and energy-efficient vehicles? Are you eating too much meat, traveling too far, or having too many children? For example, in 2019, BP posted this tweet on Twitter that reads, "The first step to reducing your emissions is to know where you stand. Find out your hashtag carbon footprint with our new calculator and share your pledge today." This is the company that was responsible for the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010, also known as the largest marine oil spill in history and one of the largest environmental disasters in American history. Yet despite their historical and ongoing contribution to ecological destruction, BP returns the onus onto individuals by urging each one of us to think about how we can reduce our carbon footprints. The reality is that ecological destruction is predominantly caused by large corporations and governmental exploits. A study in 2017 by the Carbon Disclosure Project, in collaboration with the Climate Accountability Institute, reported that since 1988, just 100 companies have been the source of more than 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. The report also found that more than half of global industrial emissions since 1988 can be traced to just 25 corporate and state-owned entities. These emissions are notable enough to have had significant contributions to climate change. I want to be clear. I am not here to say that individual commitments towards achieving environmental justice are insignificant or unimportant. However, the belief that the incredibly complex and enormous issue of climate change and ecological crisis can be fixed if individuals simply tweak their lifestyle choices and consumer choices is not only ludicrous, but incredibly dangerous. In fact, the misdirected narrative that climate change is a direct result of individual consumption has been used by the fossil fuel industry repeatedly as a defense against litigation for causing environmental destruction in court. Profit-hungry corporations have successfully convinced us that we can save the planet and fight climate change if we buy the right products and support the right brands. This misdirected focus detracts from the real culprits of climate change: large corporations and government institutions. For decades, governments and corporations around the world have collaborated to create policies and subsidies that would maximize profit while knowing fully about the risk of climate change. Since the early 1950s, oil and gas companies such as Shell were becoming increasingly aware of the ecological repercussions associated with the oil and gas industry. In the 1970s, oil and gas companies such as Exxon and Total were aware of the environmental degradation caused by the oil and gas industry, but were actively suppressing the release of this information through campaigns of confusion and financial incentives towards governments. In 2020 alone, Canada spent at least $18 million in federal support and subsidies for fossil fuel companies. Focusing on individual action to address climate change without challenging the oppressive and inequitable systems that contribute to climate change results in stagnated change and recurring cycles of environmental destruction. Additionally, the policing of personal consumption and its contributions towards climate change also places blame onto those from marginalized backgrounds, who frequently do not have the financial privilege to engage in green consumerism. It is unfair to shame individuals for engaging in everyday activities within problematic systems, such as driving a car to work or buying fast fashion, when they are already limited by the constraints of our problematic systems. Someone from a low-income background may not have the financial privilege of buying sustainable, slow-fashion brands, such as Patagonia, or eat sustainably farmed cattle. On a global scale, we can especially see how individual-led approaches towards climate change are not enough. One popular topic that comes up quite frequently when talking about climate change and ecological degradation is overpopulation. Overpopulation and its relationship with environmentalism clearly illustrates how governments, corporations, and industries have successfully externalized the blame of ecological destruction onto individuals. Examining the concept of overpopulation on a global scale also highlights that environmental degradation and climate change is not a standalone issue, but is largely caused by inequitable, oppressive systems. The basic premise behind the overpopulation narrative is quite simple. The growth of the global population is resulting in resource depletion at an unsustainable rate, thus causing climate chaos. To address this issue, we need solutions related to population control. The topic of overpopulation was popularized in the 1960s by books such as The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich and The Limits to Growth by Donella Meadows. In the past few decades, overpopulation continues to be blamed for the worsening climate crisis and ecological degradation by well-known climate activists such as David Attenborough and Jane Goodall. These individuals discussed the rapidly increasing populations of countries in the global south and raised concerns about how the large global populations of these countries are resulting in increased emissions and consumption. Despite the fact that math does confirm that population is a factor in environmental impact, conceptualizing overpopulation without a nuanced understanding of the issue fails to address the root cause of the climate crisis. The reality is that inequities in power, wealth, and access to resources, not population growth, are the key drivers of environmental degradation. A study led by Oxfam on carbon inequality demonstrated that the poorest half of the global population are only responsible for around 10% of emissions, while the richest 10% of people in the world are responsible for around 50% of global emissions. And while the global human population is growing, it is not growing exponentially as many believe. In fact, this growth is slowing and predicted to stabilize at around 11 billion by the year 2100. According to the World Population Prospects 2019 by the UN, it is expected that half of the growth by 2100 will be concentrated in the following 9 countries, ordered from the highest to the least growth: India, Nigeria, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Pakistan, Ethiopia, the United Republic of Tanzania, the United States of America, Uganda, and Indonesia. By North American standards, most of these people will be fairly poor, and their per capita consumption of resources will thus be fairly low. Note that the majority of these countries' citizens are racialized. Why is this significant? Because the origins of population control are deeply rooted in sexist, white supremacist, racist, and eugenicist beliefs. Discussions around population control are almost always concerning non-white countries, frequently in the form of forced sterilization of racialized individuals and legally enforced family planning. For example, in America, forced sterilization was practiced to reduce the population of racialized, disabled, impoverished, and mentally ill individuals by performing unnecessary hysterectomies without consent. It was believed that this practice would thus minimize the social and economic costs associated with the marginalized communities and their existence. This was so commonly practiced against poor, racialized women in the southern states that it became known as the Mississippi appendectomy. Ecological justice and social justice are inseparable. Blaming human population growth, especially in racialized, impoverished nations, displaces the blame from the industries, corporations, and governments that continue to have the greatest contribution to ecological destruction. Countries in Asia and Africa continue to firsthand experience the results of climate and ecological disasters, despite the fact that individuals in these countries contribute the least to environmental degradation. We should be devoting our attention to the extreme inequities present globally: inequitable distribution of resources, the exorbitant consumption of the wealthy, destructive government and corporate institutions, and finally, a series of systems in which financial gains are prioritized over social and ecological well-being. So what are the next steps to making meaningful change? Ironically, I always recommend starting within yourself. Think about your mentality around climate change and environmental sustainability. How have you practiced being environmentally sustainable in the past? How have you judged others on their approach towards environmental sustainability? Has your previous approach been over-focused on individual choices and consumer changes? Instead of thinking of yourself as an environmentally concerned consumer, start thinking about yourself as an environmentally concerned community member or citizen. As an environmentally concerned citizen or community member, your impact becomes greater than just what your dollar stands for. Who are you voting into power within your communities, within your province, and within your country? What do your political leaders stand for? What are their views on social issues, including climate justice and environmental sustainability? How have they allocated their budget towards ecological initiatives, and what initiatives do they have in place? So while you do continue to pursue an environmentally friendly lifestyle as an individual, also consider the role that you play within the political system. Continue to reduce your dependency on plastics and support environmentally friendly and ethical brands. However, don't just stop there. Use your vote to support politicians and hold corporations accountable for their actions. Go to city council meetings, question your city councilors, and research the allocation of money in your city budgets. You can also organize within your community to host letter writing campaigns to political leaders, schools, universities, and organizations to hold them accountable for their actions. Most importantly, learn how to harness the power that comes with collective, large-scale mobilization. Start conceptualizing your organizing and your efforts as part of a collective. Invest time to research your local, digital, and global communities. Find the collectives and the communities that are fighting against inequity and stand by them. In your community, it might look like collaboratively creating a community garden to support sustainable forms of farming that improves local biodiversity while minimizing the need to import fruits from distant locations. It might also look like creating bicycling co-ops to empower bicyclists with bike repair skills while reducing the dependency on fossil fuel vehicles. It might even look like creating renewable energy grids to power homes, schools, community centers, and more. A perfect example would be the Coastal First Nations Community Clean Energy Projects located in the colonially recognized province of British Columbia. The communities in the Great Bear Initiative have invested in renewable energy initiatives to help protect their land and water and also enhance local economies. This includes small storage hydroelectric plants and solar panel electricity projects to power houses and schools. If you don't know where to get started yourself, you can always look at volunteering with your local conservation authority or your local grassroots organizations. Another powerful way to combat climate change is to invest in other social initiatives that empower marginalized communities. If you care about environmental justice and climate justice, then you should also care about supporting other social causes, such as gender equity, racial justice, financial empowerment, and Indigenous sovereignty. For example, Indigenous communities have long been leading the resistance efforts against oil and gas extraction, deforestation, water pollution, and other forms of environmental degradation. The Land Back movement, grounded in the goal of returning land to the stewardship of Indigenous peoples, has seen monumental successes, including the removal of dams along Klamath River in Oregon and the return of 1,200 acres of ancestral homeland to the Estelan Nation. To this day, Wet'suwet'en and land defenders are engaged in ongoing resistance against the Coast GasLink pipeline. Though we alone cannot solve climate change, mass mobilization of our communities has the power to challenge the inequitable power structures that have led to the problems that we are currently facing.